Good afternoon and good evening. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to chair this first webinar. My name is Simplice Mbolambasi. I am the regional advisor responsible for adolescent, youth, and school health, working at the WHO Regional Office for Africa based in Brazzaville, Congo. As Peter highlighted, today is the International Youth Day. I really think that with this webinar, we have the opportunity to discuss a topic of great importance. We are going to discuss about gender and adolescent sexual and reproductive health. The theme of the 2020 International Youth Day is engagement for global action. From my perspective, I think that we need to take into account gender equity for global action, for regional action, and also for national action. We need also to encourage all stakeholders, all actors to consider gender equity in order to better address issues and challenges that populations, especially young people, are facing in the area of sexual and reproductive health and rights. We know that today, the dimension of gender equity is crucial. So we need to consider this in all policies, all strategies, and also all global, regional, and national plans. For this webinar, the first webinar, because it will be a series of webinars, for the first one, we have three main sessions. The first one, over the first one, we will be giving the floor to Anna and Evelyn for their introductory words. And then for the first session, we will giving the floor to two eminent panelists to make an update on key topics. The first one will be in relation to gender and adolescent health, with special focus on adolescent sexual and reproductive health. This will be done by Beatrice Maina. And the second topic that will be presented by Dr. Chandra Muli is in relation to the gender socialization process and the window of opportunity of early adolescent period. Following the panelist update, we will open the session of Q&A, and then we will close the session. Before giving the floor to our panelists, allow me to share with you to introduce them. I will start with Beatrice. Beatrice is a researcher with the African Population and Health Research Center. Her research interest is in adolescent sexual and reproductive health and gender issues, particularly among very young adolescents. In addition, Beatrice is a PhD candidate in public health, and her PhD research focuses examine construction of masculinities and sexual development among very young adolescent boys. As for Dr. Chandra Muli, he leads the work on adolescent sexual and reproductive health in the WHO Department of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Research, which includes UNDP, UNFPA, UNICEF, WHO, and World Bank Human Reproductive Program. His work includes building the evidence base on adolescent sexual and reproductive health, and supporting countries to translate this evidence into action. His experience in generating knowledge and taking knowledge to action is global in scope and spans over 30 years. Having said that, I would like to call upon Anna for the welcome words. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Simplice. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much to APHRC colleagues, our HRP Alliance Hub Principal Investigator, Dr. Evelyn Gittau, and other colleagues with APHRC. Likewise, my own HRP colleagues, Dr. Chandra and Dr. Marina, who have contributed to the organization of this webinar series. I'm also very happy to be in this very distinguished group of participants, and also likewise seeing that we have our regional office represented, the regional office of WHO, APHRC represented, and likewise very many participants that I can see are still coming in from very many different places, which is fantastic. My name is Anna Thorsen. I am a unit head of the Research Leadership and Capacity Strengthening Unit within the Department of Sexual and Reproductive Health and Research with WHO in Geneva, which also hosts the Human Reproductive Program, the special program that is unique to the United Nations in its mandate to carry out research and nota bene research capacity strengthening in sexual and reproductive health and rights. Hence, we are very happy to see this webinar series comprising the methodologies and tools linked to the Global Early Adolescent Study, which really focuses on gender and reproductive health. This is at the core of our work and also at core of our work within the HRP Alliance, which is our research capacity strengthening program. The HRP Alliance is an initiative that we use to bring together institutions conducting research in sexual and reproductive health and rights in collaboration with WHO, country offices, regional offices, and colleagues at headquarters. The HRP Alliance fulfills the mandate of carrying out research capacity strengthening in low and lower middle income countries and other low-resourced or challenged settings. And it encompasses a dynamic network structure which brings together these different partners with an ambition to really create equitable partnerships in research, and also to see to that this research is not forgotten or left undisseminated, but really turned into policy and practice when we have concrete results to show. By this way, linking research capacity strengthening to the research that we do within HRP, we hope that the knowledge transfer in relation to also working with understanding and translating results into action will all help and promote to reach our main vision and end goal of improving sexual and reproductive health and rights globally through research and research capacity strengthened. Within the HRP Alliance, we work with regional hubs or sub-regional hubs that work together with us to strengthen research capacity in the regions, also establishing partnerships with institutions who may have different needs in their vicinity. And we have, as it is now, 7 different HRP Alliance hubs that are located in Brazil, in the AMRO region. We have one in Pakistan in the AMRO region, one in Thailand representing the Southeast Asia region. We have one in Hanoi, Vietnam, representing Western Pacific region, And we also have actually 3 hubs in sub-Saharan Africa, one in Francophone Africa, in Burkina Faso. And then we do work with an HRP Alliance hub at the Ghana School of Public Health, and then of course our hub with APHRC in Nairobi, Kenya, who works with broadly over the English-speaking sub-Saharan African region with a little bit of a preference to the eastern southern areas, but also working very much together with Ghana in terms of covering different aspects of work in this region. We're very happy for the fact that APHRC has taken a lead in this webinar series and in spreading the word on the existence of these tools and methodologies related to the Global Early Adolescent Study. This has been an excellent initiative taken by APHRC and HRB colleagues that we are very happy about, seeing that promoting gender equity and reproductive health is at core of our mandate within the HRP Alliance. And we would like to see these tools and these methodologies to spread, and also to see how these can be picked up and perhaps integrated in future research capacity strengthening endeavors that we are happy to discuss more about. With those words, I'd like to wish you a very great webinar and a continued webinar series. And I see, as they say, that this webinar is the start of something beautiful, and we look forward and hope to work more with you in relation to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this informative introductory web. Now, I would like to give the floor to Evelyn. Yes, to Evelyn to update us on the APHRC and the 3 webinars. Evelyn, over to you, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. And I'm really glad to see many of you here today. Attending this webinar. As of the last time I checked, I think we're almost 100 participants, which is really exciting to see that people are engaged today. So my name is Dr. Evelyn Gitau. I lead the hub here at the African Population and Health Research Center, which is a hub that is part of the WHO HRP Alliance for Research Capacity Strengthening, as Anna mentioned. So I'll take you very few minutes really to tell you a bit about who we are and how we engage with the WHO HRP Alliance and the objectives for this webinar. So APHRC is a leading Pan-African research institution that carries out research across the board in trying to improve the lives of all Africans. We believe that African individuals should be leading conversations about Africa and trying to shape its own future. So in terms of conversations around adolescent health in Africa, we believe that we should be playing a part in this role. Our vision is to transform lives in Africa through research, and we do this by generating evidence and strengthening research capacity, and also engaging policy to inform action on population health and well-being. Our values are fairness, integrity, and equity, and this is why we are so passionate about issues around reproductive health and in ensuring that adolescents are being treated as fairly as they should. As part of our approach, we generate evidence and research, and up until 2012, we were actually just doing the evidence generation and continuing to do the evidence generation and building capacities for research and evidence generation. But we realized that if we don't work at disseminating and ensuring that the evidence that we are generating is being inputted into action and being implemented by practitioners, we were not really going to make the impact we're looking at. So since 2017, we have now gone across the board to try and build capacities from generating, doing the research, generating that evidence, and packaging the evidence, and actually working with policymakers and policy actors to try and ensure that we get all that research making an impact and changing the lives that we want changed. So we conduct research and research capacity strengthening in more than 35 countries across sub-Saharan Africa. Our headquarters is here in Nairobi, but we also have an office in Senegal that we recently opened. So what's our aim as being a partner in this HRP Alliance? Our main aim is to be a regional SRHR implementing research and knowledge translation hub that provides support for sexual reproductive health rights, research capacity strengthening in the region. Our specific objectives as a hub is to strengthen individual capacities to engage in policy processes and dissemination of the sexual reproductive health rights research output, to support institutions to institutionalize tools like the ones we're going to be discussing in the series of webinars, to train individual researchers within their own institutions and within their own countries. We then hope to enhance uptake of research output in policy making by facilitation of the research policymaker interactions. So a bit about what you're going to be doing for the next couple of weeks over the webinars that we're going to be hosting. The first webinar, which is the one you're attending today, is going to be exploring the link between gender and adolescent health. It will examine this link with a special focus on adolescent sexual and reproductive health, and it will explore the gender socialization process and the special window of opportunity of the early adolescent period and why we must take advantage of this window. The second webinar, which will be held on the 19th of August, here you will learn about the history of the global early adolescent study that led to the output of and the development of the toolkits that we'll be talking about. The study itself then came up with measures, the toolkit, both qualitative and quantitative measures. And in that second webinar, you'll also explore the findings from that study that relate to gender and their utility in research and programming. The third and final webinar will focus around participatory methods in engaging adolescents. And the goal for that one will be to learn about participatory research with very young adolescents and learn about timeline and mapping activities as methods of engaging very young adolescents, and also learn a method of photo voice as a qualitative method of engaging very young adolescents. I'm going to stop there because our facilitators are really engaged and are going to be very exciting today and for the next couple of weeks. And I do hope that you will enjoy the webinars that we are going to be hosting for the next few days. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn, for this informative update. Then now I would like to give the floor to the first panelist. And the first panelist is Beatrice Maina. Beatrice, over to you.
Thank you, Simplice, and hello, everyone.
You have 12 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead, please. Over to you, Beatrice.
So my presentation focuses on gender and adolescent sexual and reproductive health. And to start off, we'll look at what we refer to as gender. Next slide, please. So we look at gender as a social construct referring to the roles and expectations a society considers as appropriate for males and females, and often denoted as being masculine or feminine. Let's go to the next slide, please. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Beatrice, we can hear you.
Please. We can hear you.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So when we look at gender, I would like to differentiate what we refer to as gender and what we refer to as sex. So different from gender, sex is the biological, or rather the anatomical and physiological characteristics of male and female. And in other sectors. And there are different ways that gender affects health, but in general, Hayes and colleagues, they highlight 5 different gendered pathways to health, which includes access to resources, biased health systems, biased health research, access to healthcare, and health behaviors. And you can access more about these different pathways on their article that they published in the Lancet. Next slide, please. So my presentation today is guided by preliminary findings from ongoing work on gender norms and sexual reproductive health among adolescents in sub-Saharan Africa. And while this work focuses on early adolescence, the findings are important in understanding how gender impacts on sexual reproductive health behaviors and outcomes, not only in adolescence, but in adult life. I'll, however, complement these key highlights with global data. But first, it's for us to understand years, and this is the age category that we refer to as early adolescence. Over half of the adolescent population live in Asia, and nearly a quarter of the population in sub-Saharan Africa comprise of adolescents. Next slide, please. I'll briefly talk about gender socialization, and I know Chodra will be touching on this later, as this is an important step in understanding how gender affects adolescent sexual and reproductive health. So the gender socialization process is basically the learning process of what is expected of being male and female in a society. And this begins early in life. And as pubertal maturation sets in, which often happens around the early adolescence period, young people contend with pressures to conform to gender expectations as they transit from childhood to adulthood. And so young people already begin to shape their attitudes and behaviors around these social expectations, creating gender differences, which often lead to inequalities. And these differences often reflect a shrinking world for girls and a broadening world for boys. So girls become more protected, and it's always for good reasons, while boys are often let free. So how does gender impact on adolescent sexual and reproductive health? We first look at male dominance and girls' agency in sexual relationships. And gender norms create unequal power relations that constrain adolescents, especially girls, from exercising agency with regard to their sexuality, including negotiating safe sex practices. In the studies that we have reviewed, male and female adolescents alike agree with norms about male dominance and control in decision making, and this includes in sexual and reproductive decisions, while girls are expected to be submissive. For instance, in a recent report on violence against children in Kenya, which shows that about half of adolescents aged 13 to 17 years indicate it is acceptable for a husband to beat his wife for one reason, or for one or more reasons, which includes refusing to have sex with him. Another aspect of male dominance and diminished agency for girls is in regard to what I'll refer to as money, power, and sex. And by this, I mean men paying for sex in cash or in kind constrain girls and young women's agency as girls often feel obliged to respond to men's sexual desires. A study conducted in South Africa among early adolescents showed that manhood or an attractive man entailed having money to give to girls, and money gave the boys the right to have sex with girls. So young males strongly felt they must be able to provide to the girl to have sex with her. And these young boys often felt threatened by the older men in terms of financial capabilities and had to work extra hard to maintain relationships with girls. And working extra hard included engaging in crime. So this gendered power imbalance between men and women, and for this case between boys and girls in sexual encounters and relationships, may contribute to coerced sex, sexually transmitted infections, and unintended pregnancies, among other implications. Our next finding focuses on sexual double standards, and in this, boys enjoy larger freedom to explore sexual relationships compared to girls, and they are expected to initiate romantic relationships while girls are expected to keep distance. And girls who engage in romantic and sexual relationships with boys are often perceived not only to be at risk for for health consequences like pregnancy and STIs, but also face social sanctions. However, these are not perceived as risks for boys. And thus girls are advised to stay away from boys, cover up to avoid masculine attention and sexual risks, and basically being responsible for their sexual behaviors, but having also little powers to control men's sexual desires. And since now female sexual activity is restricted, girls who express sexual agency are considered promiscuous and immoral. Our next finding is about sexual prowess, and as pubertal maturation is often seen as a marker of emerging adulthood for boys and girls, and boys are often socialized, and this mainly by their peers, to initiate sexual relationships early, as male sexual activity is usually regarded as a masculine trait. And in our ongoing work, boys often indicate having a girlfriend or many sexual partners to achieve social recognition or fit within their social networks. And as boys are expected to prove their toughness and sexual prowess, girls are held responsible for attracting male attention, which again goes back to sexual double standards. And these norms are linked to sexual risk-taking, including early sexual debut, multiple sexual partnerships with implications on sexual health. And these, for instance, we know that multiple sexual partnerships are an important factor in driving HIV infections among young people. Our next finding is about early marriages, which are prevalent in many contexts globally. About 1 in 5 girls are married by their 18th birthday. And as you can see in this map, which is based on 2018 UNICEF global data, it shows the prevalence of child marriages globally. And the darker the shade, I hope it's visible, the higher the prevalence of child marriages. As you can see, the majority of child marriages occur in South Asia, and this is followed by Sub-Saharan Africa. Child marriages are rooted in gender inequality resulting from traditional harmful practices, and such marriages force young people to take adult responsibilities for which they may not be ready for. And early marriages or child marriages are known to result in early childbearing and has been associated with poor maternal and child health outcomes. It's also a common barrier for girls and boys' education. While the prevalence, causes, and impacts of child marriages among girls have been extensively studied, there is little research that exists on child marriages among boys. A report released by UNICEF in 2019 showed that an estimated 115 million boys and men were married as children. And of these, about 23 million were married before the age of 15, indicating quite a huge research gap. Our next highlight is about female genital mutilation, and despite FGM being recognized as a violation of human rights and for girls and women, it is still quite prevalent in many regions. And based again on data from about 30 countries, majority being in sub-Saharan Africa, over 200 million girls and women have undergone FGM. And this demonstrates deeply entrenched gender norms, and in some contexts, it is endorsed. These norms are endorsed by both men and women, despite the health consequences FGM places on women and girls. For instance, a study that was conducted in Kenya in 2014 indicated that women coming from the northeastern region where FGM is commonly practiced expressed support for the continuation of FGM compared to women in other regions in Kenya. And this reflects the deep cultural beliefs and practices within that specific region. In contexts where FGM is practiced, girls and women often face social sanctions and condemnation if they abandon the practice. And we already know that FGM is closely linked to early marriages and consequently early child bearing, with again consequences on child and adolescent health. Lastly, we look at male circumcision, which is often a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood, and mainly happens during the adolescence period in many contexts. Male circumcision is considered a key masculine attribute in some regions or in some contexts. And while there is compelling evidence that male circumcision reduces the risk of heterosexually acquired HIV infection in men, on the flip side, and using an example of a study conducted in South Africa, circumcision was seen to promote early sexual debut and was perceived to prevent boys from sexually transmitted infections. And these perceptions are likely to promote sexual risk-taking, including concurrent relationships and condom non-use in sexual encounters. So in conclusion, while we observe these widespread endorsements of inequitable gender norms, and despite the gender implications on adolescent sexual and reproductive health, there is emerging evidence that young people are beginning to challenge these norms. For instance, in a study conducted in Uganda, it showed that more girls than boys endorsed equitable gender norms, including girls initiating sexual relationships. Another study conducted in South Africa found that most students tended to disagree with dating abuse. Results from the Global Early Adolescent Study showed that boys held more equitable attitudes towards relationships than girls in early adolescence. And another study conducted in an urban slum in Kenya showed that boys held more equitable attitudes towards sexual double standards, while on the contrary, in the same study, boys held more inequitable attitudes about male dominance in sexual relationships. And this just to highlight some of the studies that reflect that kind of changing attitudes towards equitable gender norms among adolescents. And now I will now hand over to Shodra, who will speak more about the importance of now challenging inequitable gender norms and the opportunities that exist in the early adolescence period. Thank you everyone, and over to Shodra.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. That was clear, and you painted a picture of the gender inequalities that are widespread in adolescence, and taken a number of areas to demonstrate this. In my brief presentation, I'm going to speak to gender socialization in young adolescents, drawing upon findings from the Global Early Adolescent Study. WHO has been working with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health on the Global Early Adolescent Study, the first global study on gender socialization in young adolescents since 2012. That means for 8 years. Phase 1 was completed in 2017, and phase 1 focused on formative research and tool development. Phase 2 was initiated in 2018, and phase 2 is well underway. In the second and third webinars in the series, Professor Bob Blum from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, who's the principal investigator of the study, will speak to some of the tools that were developed and how they can be used for research and for programs. And we might also get him to give us a little update of where things stand in terms of the phase 2 of the study. My next slide, please. In this presentation, I'm going to share with you 5 key findings from phase 1, and then point to 5 implications of those findings for public health and for human development. The next slide, please. So the first point is that puberty is a critical time in the life course, when pre-existing gender attitudes and norms become crystallized. Inequitable gender norms begin very early. Norms about racism, norms about gender inequality, norms about religious bias, they form very quickly. They're almost, they form in our womb as we grow and develop in our mother's wombs because of all the baggage around us. But puberty is a special time because of brain development, a special time because individuals, boys and girls, have an opportunity to see the world beyond their homes and beyond their primary schools, to see the world outside. And so this is a chance both to change your norms and attitudes, or a time to cement them for the rest of your lives. So this is a very crucial time. The next slide, please. The Global Early Adolescence Study showed us that unequal gender attitudes and norms are widespread across geographic and socio-cultural settings, with both similarities and differences across contexts. I'm just going to take the last 2 sets of points. So you take parental pressure on girls displaying appropriate behavior. That's as much true in Shanghai as in Delhi, the 2 sites for phase 1 of the study. Parents wanted girls to behave in a way that was appropriate in that particular context. What was appropriate in Delhi in these communities was different from what was appropriate in Shanghai. But parents wanted their daughters, their wards, to conform. On the other hand, parental pressure for girls to wear appropriate clothing was less of an issue in China than it was in India. So there are issues that are common. There are issues that are not common everywhere. But clearly what you have is unequal gender attitudes and norms manifest everywhere in different ways. The next slide, please. Societal expectations of boys and girls differ, and so do their own gender attitudes. Now, around the world, boys are expected to be tough, to be strong, to be brave, and as Beatrice said, to show heterosexual prowess and to exert control. Again, another point that Beatrice made from the studies she's involved in. Girls, on the other hand, are supposed to be nice, to be polite, to be submissive, to be beautiful, but to be modest. And if a boy shows assertive behavior, they say, wow, this guy is going to become a leader, maybe the president of the country. And if a girl does the same, they say, look at this girl, so badly brought up, a bitch. You know, the same behavior is interpreted completely differently, depends on whether it's a boy or a girl or a young man or a young woman. So clearly, social expectations rub on your own perceptions of what is right and wrong, and they become internalized into what are your own attitudes and values. And these norms are enforced by incentives, they're also enforced by sanctions. one of the points Beatrice made is that many studies show that the inequitable norms in girls, young adolescents, are worse than in boys. For example, one of the data points that you see in a number of countries is that more girls think it is okay for a future husband to beat them if they do a certain number of things, like leave the house without permission, don't take care of the child, burn the food, and so on. More girls than boys believe that it is true for girls to that in the future their husband should that they should be beaten. Now, some of these views are kind of applied through sanction. You know, if a girl doesn't conform with the group, then she's left out of the group or punished by the silence or lack of sharing of food or other things. And again, as Beatrice said, puberty is associated with a shrinking of girls' worlds and an expansion of boys' worlds, to the detriment of both. You know, visitors come to the house, 14-year-old boy and girl at home, the boy is asked to go and get the taxi in the evening so that the visitors can go home. And this then exposes the boy to the risks of violence on the street, for example. The next point, please. Race, ethnicity, class, and immigrant status clearly influence gender norms and attitudes. In the studies, we found that within the same geographic area, one of the sites is Ghent in Belgium. And what they found was Turkish immigrants into Ghent, who've lived there for several years, several decades, share completely different attitudes to the mainstream Belgian population. There are many reasons for that, but that's not the point of this discussion. This discussion is, when you, in these quick studies, when assessments were made, this is what was found. Of course, if you want to change that, you need an understanding of many layers of influences, of colonialism, of religion, of fear of parents, of losing their children in a foreign culture. All those kinds of issues need to be borne in mind. The next slide, please. And this is the last slide in this particular part of my talk, implications. Parents and peers are key. Parents are key. School teachers, some evidence, but not much. And there is evidence on media, a lot of evidence on media, but not so much on very young adolescents. Peers share with each other, learn from each other, support each other, patrol each other, pressurize each other. And 11, 12-year-olds are hugely conscious of what their peers say and do and what want them to say and do. Parents too are key. Parents want good things for their adolescents. They want their adolescents to be seen as good boys and good girls in the community. And they do that by using many tools that they have: instruction, encouragement, bribes, rewards, regulation, discipline, including physical beatings, much more for boys than for girls. I remember my mom, I'm 61 years old, 62 years old, but I remember my mom giving us the silent treatment, the blackmail, the long, sad face saying that, you had done something wrong. And so parents know how to punish. They're concerned about the welfare of the children and adolescents. They're extremely worried about their friends. Many parents are worried about the friends of their sons and daughters, and they're extremely worried about the media. Sometimes for very good reason, but they're very worried about the media. Next slide, please. So what are the implications of all this? The implications of this don't come from the Global Early Adolescence Study. That phase is only just emerging. Some of the Global Early Adolescence Study sites include interventions, for example, in the DRC. But this is from studies that have been carried out from around the world. The next slide, please. The first point, and this is a point that that I touched on earlier, in in early adolescence, for the what we know about brain development and about cognitive development and about emotional development, this is a time when they're looking for outside messages. They're open to issues. Many times young people say, this is the time I want to become vegetarian. This is the time I want to become, a climate sympathizer. These are the times when they want to see and do different things. The father who was a hero when they were 7-year-old now is seen in all his faults as, is this the man I really considered a hero? So, this is a time to engage with adolescents in open discussions and to take into account their evolving cognitive capacities. Rebecca Lundgren, one of the real heroes in this field, did a wonderful study in Nepal and published a paper which is really worth reading called Whose Turn to Do the Dishes, where she, working with young boys and girls in the context of Save the Children clubs, the boys clearly understood that it was unfair that they came home with their sisters at the same time and that they could go out and play, but the sisters had to help their mothers make chapatis. So clearly they are willing to listen if they can be engaged. Next slide, please. The same study by Rebecca, the boys agreed, and they agreed to help their sisters at home, but they did not want their friends to know because they would be considered sissies. So it's very important to do this critical reflection in groups, in peer groups. This is in early adolescence, but also in later adolescence. The brutal rape and killing of the girl which occurred in Delhi about 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, was in a group. It's a group of boys who attacked this girl in a bus. So peers have a strong positive or negative influence. Peer connectedness, peer modeling, peer awareness of each other's norms can be protective, but it also can increase risk. And so this is clearly something that we need to tap into. And the next slide, please. And today, the peer group influences take place on social media. The next slide, please, Peter. So you have in the past, it was in this church playground or in the school playground, and that does occur. But increasingly, and particularly now in the context of COVID-19, a lot of the interactions and all the relationship building and the personality development are occurring in the context of media, of social media. And that is now clearly an important part of anything that we do in the context of the peer group. The third point, please, 3 out of 5 points. The third point is that we need to incorporate gender equitable norms in all the work that we do. When you have a look at some of the parenting tools, they are steeped in gender inequality. The illustrative examples reinforce gender inequitable norms. And it's quite, it's really cringeworthy when you see some of these tools and say, this is what we've been using as training tools, and they are in fact reinforcing gender inequality. We need to incorporate gender equitable norms and remove the gender inequitable norms that are there in many tools that are widely used and widely available in the public arena. The next slide, please. So this is again a point that I made earlier. This is a set of Save the Children tools, choices, voices, and promises. Choices is working at the level of the individual boy or girl, working at the level of at the family, so that the family's voice is heard and the adolescent's voice is heard, and in the family so that they are part of a family discussion, and then addressing this at the level of the community. Some of the work that is being done in the context of the Global Early Adolescent Study is trying to see how these multi-level interventions, such as the one that was implemented in Uganda in the context of the GREAT project, are now work in the context of a long-term study. And my last set of 2 points, next slide, please, Peter, is working in schools. Now, with one of the great achievements of the Millennium Development Goals were more kids came into school and are staying on in school. Clearly, although girls are dropping out of school, this is clearly a place where we can reach young people. And the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, one of the big changes in the revised version as a result of the Global Early Adolescent Study and other studies is its gender content. And so increasingly we are using this as arguments in countries such as Saudi Arabia to include sexuality education because it addresses gender equitable norms. Countries are much more willing to address this because this is seen as such a key part of any equitable, any education on sexuality and relationships. And the last slide, please. The last point here is media. My colleague Avni Amin, who co-leads our work on gender-based violence, shared this slide with me. You know, the presence in the screen and speaking time of male and female characters in movies. So all the characters you see in your life, all the successful ones are all males, and the side roles and the supportive roles are all females. So this is the kind of stuff that becomes a part of anything that we do. And again, one of the points that I learned from Avni is, this in India, dark skin color is considered bad, and light skin color is considered good for many, many reasons. And so what you have then is companies which make billions of dollars selling products which are skin lightening creams, and then do a token social support campaign, which is like 2.5% of their entire revenue. The marketing communicates these kinds of messages. And if, like we've learned from tobacco, if you want to cut these things at the bud, we have to cut advertising. My last slide, please. This is a slide I got from Joe Boyden from the Young Lives Project, another one of my great heroes, who says that, yes, we can work with gender norms and attitudes, but we have to see things in the larger perspective. The drivers for change are jobs, are economic opportunities, are education opportunities. So, Beatrice talked about the high levels of child marriage, but actually in India, child marriage rates have dropped by 4 million every year. And one of the reasons is because of jobs for girls and young women, and older women. And that means families see that girls and women have value and they vote with their feet. Yes, we can do social norm change interventions. Yes, you can work at the individual and community level, but we really have to address the structural factors which reinforce inequality, including gender inequality. So that then is our introduction from Beatrice and myself to the concepts of gender. In the second and third webinars, Caroline Kabiru, Bob Blum, and others will take you through the tools and their application for research and programming. Over to you, Sam, please, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Beatrice and Chandra. Now, I would like to invite all the participants to make a big applaud for Anna, Evelyn, Beatrice, and Chandra, and then we will open the floor for the Q&A. So, could we do that, please? Okay. Before taking open question, I think it will be great to give the floor to Peter. Peter, could you please share with us some burning questions that were posted in the chat function, please.
Okay, thank you, Simply.
And I noticed that there are a lot of questions, so you can only select some burning question.
Yes.
And then we will open once again the floor.
Okay.
Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Simply. So the first question is was asked by Janina Joachim, and it's about, she was wondering if there's anything known about gender socialization and girls' families. Is there anything known about gender socialization in the context of single parenthood or adolescent mothers?
I could briefly talk about that. I think the many studies that I've come across, there is barely that differentiation in parenthood, but we have done a recent study. The findings are not yet out, so this is quite preliminary. We are still in the analysis stage, which shows the differences in gender socializations between fathers and mothers, and between girls and boys. So how fathers socialize girls, how fathers socialize boys, and how parents, single parents versus kids or children living with both parents are socialized. And the interesting finding is that mothers socialize both boys and girls towards more gender equitable norms, and this is specific to this study, while fathers are quite inequitable. They lean towards the gender inequitable norms. Over.
Okay, thank you, Beatrice, for that. You also mentioned about, Chandra, you want to answer something?
Yes, please. But thank you for that very interesting question. The only point I'd like to make at this stage is that in Edinburgh, which was one of the sites for phase 1, and remember, the Global Early Adolescence Study was looking at poor urban communities, they found it extremely hard to recruit fathers in any of the activities. And there was a huge sense of deprivation and the absence of a father in those households. Thank you for that question. And Peter, what I can promise is before the next webinar, I will get hold of a couple of papers on that, and we will make sure that we can share them with the participants for further information on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra and Beatrice, for that. Another question is, how is FGM or FGC closely linked with early child marriage?
So there was a very interesting webinar organized on this subject about 6 to 8 weeks ago. And while, I mean, both of them are harmful traditional practices, if you like. Both of them, so clearly there are similarities. They are hugely grounded in gender inequality, in gender inequitable norms, and in traditions which assign value to girls who are married early or girls who have experienced FGM. But on the other hand, there are many parts of the world where you have one but not the other. So they do go together. There are clearly factors which are driving them, which are important. But on the other hand, they're not universally together. And what you see in places like Syria, after once the civil strife started, child marriage rates have increased, and parents use child marriage as a survival strategy. In countries such as India and Ethiopia, with increasing opportunities for education and employment, families are walking away from child marriage. And sometimes they don't even need the encouragement to do that. Norms change and people change. On the other hand, what you're seeing in Western Europe is the pressure to have female genital mutilation is so strong that families who have been living in Western Europe are bringing their daughters back to Africa for female genital mutilation in the summer holidays. There's a big campaign in many French schools to prevent these kinds of issues. So while there are similarities, there are differences. Again, very interesting question, and I promise to gather more information on this and share it with you. The link, what is similar and what is dissimilar between child marriage and female genital mutilation.
All right, thank you, Chandra, for that question. So there is a comment here. So this is just a comment, and we note that. Could you please provide the links to the researches cited? So we will gather that together with what Chandra has promised, and we'll share to the participants. And another comment from Professor Robert Blum is that it is important to note that male circumcision is strongly related to a decrease in HIV transmission. It's not just a perception. There's strong data that supports that. Another question specifically for Chandra: Are there effective and scalable interventions that target parents to promote gender equitable norms?
Are there effective interventions to target parents to build gender equitable norms? Yes, there are. And parenting interventions have been implemented in some places. For example, the Strategies for Hope initiative worked with the World Council of Churches to develop tools for working with parents in small Christian communities, which has worked in many African countries. And so they have worked with parents to address these 5 roles, you know, the role of connection, that is to provide unconditional love, regulation, to show modeling, to provide respect for evolving capacity, and to provide and to protect. So these kinds of initiatives have been put in place in a number of sub-Saharan African countries. And in Latin America, a tested program from North America, whose name I don't remember just now, has been adapted and used in a number of Latin American countries. And they have been evaluated, they have been tested as well. So parenting interventions are there. ICRW has now developed new gender equitable norm building tools and have supported their application in India and Vietnam. So there are tools that are there. There are approaches that have been shown to be effective in the small scale. What we need is to scale them up. And that's the big challenge. How do you scale them up? What do you do to take these scale up interventions? There's a lot of talk about this. There is the stepping stones and these kinds of interventions. How do you scale up these intensive interventions, which requires good facilitation? So there's a whole series of activities going on in that area. And again, Rebecca Lundgren led the development of a Journal of Adolescent Health supplement. And again, I can point to a couple of papers on this. What does it take to take these kinds of intensive interventions to scale?
Thank you, Chandra, for that. I would just like to bring the attention to the chat box where Caroline Kabilu, who has been mentioned and was part of the GEAS study, has posted a link where you can access a report on the association between FGM and child marriage. I know there was that question, and so if you'd like more information about that, please go to the chat and get that link. Now, another comment here.
So the initiative is called Fuerzas Familias, Strong Families. That's a project initiative from North America, which was then adapted and applied in a number of Latin American countries. So in addition to the link that Caroline has provided, we will make available all these tools to you. Thank you. Sorry, Peter, to interrupt.
It's okay. Thank you, Chandra. So, Elsley, I also note your comment. Could we have the references of the studies and publications that Beatrice and Chandra are referring to in the interesting presentations? We will do that. I want to ask, there's a question here from Faith Mbushi. What can you say about the influence of mass and social media on adolescents in light of the digital divide?
Beatrice, do you want to go first? The influence of mass media and social media on attitudes, values, norms.
Yeah, I think from my end, lately, this has been a very huge concern for people, and especially because of ease of access to media and the media portrayals for what it means to be either a male or what it means to be female. This also is challenged by the ease of access and again on sexually explicit media, which socializes young people to early sexual activity, which is not monitored, which is not controlled by any which is not really controlled. So it's quite a challenge. It's quite a problem, I would say, and it has its own implications in that what they access, how they use the information that they do access may have implications on their sexual and reproductive health. For instance, if young people watch pornography, which is easily accessible in many of the media platforms, they are likely to, it's likely to initiate their sexual exploration. They are likely to engage in sexual activity or initiate sexual activity at an early age as a result of what they've been socialized from the media or from the information they receive on the media. However, we can't rule out that there are some media channels or media access or information that they can access through the media. So it all depends on how we weigh the media. It could be used as a platform, as a source of information for young people if it's used appropriately. However, on the other hand, it could be young people accessing unsolicited information from the media, which is likely to impact on their sexual and reproductive health behaviors and outcomes. So for me, it's both ways. It's one way it's okay, on the other way, it needs to be closely monitored.
Thank you, Beatrice. To add to that, this is turning out to be a really lively discussion and a fascinating discussion. There was a very interesting Journal of Adolescent Health article on mobile telephone use, on social media. And so clearly, as Beatrice said, this is here to stay. The influence of social media and of mobile phone use on young people is here to stay. And it does have beneficial effects, and it does have negative effects. And so the question then is, how do you maximize the benefits and minimize the harm? And that comes back to parenting roles, which is, one of the 5 roles is about regulation, is about regulating screen time, about regulating access to programs which could be misleading, could be harmful. For example, my wife is a psychiatrist. She works here in Switzerland. There's a whole campaign here to block access to social media sites which teach anorexic girls how to mask their medicine use, their laxative use from doctors. There's a whole campaign of websites on these kinds of issues. And so there are clearly websites which are harmful. Does pornography lead to harm? That's an open question. There's some evidence that violent pornography can point to violent tendencies, but not all studies say that pornography leads to harmful effects. I think we have to learn, we have to be evidence-based in our recommendations and not jump into into preconceived notions about what is good or what is bad about particular approaches. Clearly, this is a force. Clearly, this is particularly very useful, but clearly it can also cause harm. Many hours and there are many efforts. For instance, the number of hours spent on social media or on the computer also means that they are not physically active. So there are many effects that need to be taken into account. So the bottom line is in moderation with some regulation. Over to you, Peter.
All right, thank you, Chandra. Now to the last few questions that we have. This is specifically for Beatrice. Beatrice, could you please explain the difference between urgency and autonomy? Do we still promote urgency in early adolescence period between 10 and 14?
Well, this is quite interesting, the difference between autonomy and agency. I think for me, there is a thin line between agency and autonomy. And I know in some contexts it has been used like, the two terms have been used synonymously. But I think autonomy, it's more or less, like having that freedom to do, for instance, to make decisions about your sexual health. But I don't know what agency probably or perhaps goes deeper into, having that capacity. You have the freedom, but do you have the capacity to do that? Are there any barriers for you to be able to exercise your freedom? I see that as a difference. It's made, as a difference. And I think for young people, promoting agency means they have the capacity or the ability to say no if they don't feel comfortable in some of the activities. For instance, they're being socialized. If for instance, for a girl, and being able to say no to sex if you do not want to have sex, and please allow me to use this as an example. Being able to say no to sex if you really don't want to have sex promotes, it's more or less like you have the agency to do that. You have the ability to say no to something that you don't want to. And I think it's important for this to be promoted quite early for them as they start being aware of their sexual maturation, being aware of the risks that they are exposed to. We also need to build their agency to be able to make decisions about their sexual health. And I think this needs to start early in life.
Thank you. Just to add to that, in the chat, please have a look at the chat. There's a comment from Professor Blum saying that recent analysis of GEAS data from both high and low income countries shows an association between pornography viewing and violence perpetration by both boys and girls. So, the evidence on that is slowly building. And so we need to keep tabs of where we are with that. Now, the issue about agency and autonomy is very interesting. We've just published a paper on lessons learned over 25 years on improving access to and uptake of contraception by adolescents. So, we used an ICRW framework for this analysis. The first is we need to address desire to limit space and delay childbearing. The second is desire to use contraception. And the third one is the key one, which is the ability to negotiate contraceptive use and to make decisions on their own. And so sometimes agency may mean agency to negotiate with your partner. It may mean agency to resist the pressure of your parents to get you married off early. Agency to refuse unwanted sex. That's not necessarily the same thing as autonomy. They're still within a relationship. They're still interdependent. They still are not making independent decisions entirely on their own. But clearly, they have the agency in the relationship they are in to stand up for themselves and to articulate their hopes, their aspirations, and their wishes. For example, in terms of reproductive decision making. And clearly, agency is a very important part of being autonomous. So this is clearly an attribute and in this whole issue of being autonomous.
Thank you, Chandra and Beatrice, for your questions. I would also like to draw your attention to the chat box, and some of these studies and publications that have been referred to by Beatrice and Chandra are available at the GEAS study website, www.geastudy.org. And of course, during the next webinar that is upcoming, Professor Robert Blum will be shedding light on the GEAS study. So to our last two questions, this one is specifically, yes, Chandra.
No, just to say I've noted the points so far. Single parents and gender socialization, child marriage and FGM. Caroline has already put the POP Council report on the website. On the chat box, we will include that as well. Evidence of scaling up of social norm change interventions, and particularly parenting interventions, and then the effect of mass media and social media on adolescents, on gender norms, but also on adolescent development. Back to you. So I've noted all these points, and we'll make sure that we gather 2 to 3 key papers on each of these subjects.
Okay, thank you, Chandra. I have 2 more questions here, but one I will refer Martha to either Chandra or Beatrice. Maybe if it's possible to have a side conversation about the kind of work that you're doing. But Chandra, there's a question here specifically for you. Are there successful interventions that have targeted media actors to ensure that media companies deliberately take action to ensure media programs promote the equitable norms?
Yes, there have been a number of media programs working on media in the context of HIV prevention, in the context of child marriage prevention, in the context of increasing contraceptive use, increasing family planning. There haven't been media interventions at scale that I am aware of, which are talking about gender socialization. On the other hand, you could take examples such as this big campaign which is underway in India of the importance of girls' education, and that the girl is important to educate, to protect. And so there are various media campaigns which address the rights of girls, the place of girls in society. And so there are both programs, organized and led by UNICEF and by other social players, as well as increasingly these kinds of issues being integrated into movies and into public service messaging. And again, happy to put together and share with you messages like that. My colleagues Claudia Garcia Moreno and Avni Amin have gathered examples of programs that address gender-based violence. For example, a program in Latin America, Nicaragua, Sextido Cinto. I will again point out to some examples like that. So yes, they are, but increasingly what we see is one-off programs on their own are not enough. The Soul City program in South Africa, for instance, you can do a Google search, was a program that was highly successful in raising these kinds of issues. But what we've seen for many years, even from the old days for radio programs, is they work best when they're combined with other complementary interventions, so that you have multiple levels of the socio-ecological framework, with interventions working at the individual level, the community level, and there social media and mass media can play a reinforcing role.
Okay, thank you, Chandra, for that, for your contribution to that question. I would believe that, okay, we have exhausted the questions that you have. But there's a comment here. Just want to bring attention to our participant from Teresa. Which focuses change the negative norms towards very young adolescents and an example plan on how all the 5 implications are practical to change the norm. So I believe this is about how
I see that somebody has put a reference to Fuerzas Familias,
yes.
strong families in the site. So this is an initiative which was first developed in the US, then adapted for use in and then evaluated in a number of Latin American countries.
All right. Thank you, Chandra, for that. So I think we are done with the questions, and this time is much gone. We want to apologize, but we want to thank you so much for participating and tuning in to this meeting. We want to also welcome you to the next coming series of webinars on 19th, the same time at 4 p.m. But please log in early to avoid any connection issues. And the next one that will follow up on 26th. I would like to take this opportunity to turn you over to Simply Percy to conclude for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I would like to thank everyone for these interesting and fruitful deliberations. Before concluding, allow me to share with you key highlights that came up from these presentations and also discussions. So from the introductory work, we learned that there is a joint UN program supporting research initiative in the area of adolescent sexual and reproductive health. The main aim of this program is to build networks for capacity strengthening and conducting research. And also there is a kind of collaboration at the regional levels. So there is also a WHO HRP alliance. Within this, we learned that APHRC is leading Pan-African research institutions. The vision of this is to transform life, to generate evidence, and also to build capacity for evidence generation. Through Beatrice's presentation, we learned that through Beatrice's presentation, we were able to explore the link between gender and sexual and reproductive health. And we learned that there are several factors that could affect the gender for both girls and boys. In relation to gender socialization is key and could affect gender equity in all the regions. In some society and communities, there is unequal power in relationships where male dominance is accepted, sometimes encouraged by communities. This could impact negatively sexual and reproductive health, especially for girls. On the other hand, contrary to girls, boys enjoy freedom. With regard to early marriage, about 1 in 5 girls globally are married by their age 18, by their 18th birthday. As you may know, among the 10 first countries with the high prevalence of early marriage in the world, most of them are in the African region. So harmful practices such as early marriage and female genital mutilation still remain some areas of concern in the world. All these practices as you know, have negative impact on sexual and reproductive health. And from Chanda's presentation, we had the opportunity to explore gender socialization with young adolescents. From a study focused on the global early adolescent, there are 5 key findings that came up. The first one is in relation to unequal gender norm developed early in life, especially in puberty period. The second one, unequal gender attitude and norm are widespread across the region and also according to cultures. Societal expectation of boys and girls differ. In some countries, boy dominance is tolerated, as I've just mentioned, sometimes is encouraged. Race, ethnicity, class, and immigrant status have influence on gender norm and attitudes. Parents and peers are key in shaping gender norm and attitude, and the influence of media is now emerging. The implication of this are as follows. We need to engage with adolescents in open discussion about gender norm, attitude, taking into account the age of adolescence. No taboo. We need to discuss with them openly. We need to stimulate critical reflection in peer groups in order to foster positive change. We need also to incorporate content on gender equitable norms in all interventions, notably parenting intervention. Change norm by working at different levels is key. With regard to the ecological framework. We need to develop school-based intervention to promote gender equity and also address stereotypes perpetuated by the use of media, especially social media. And we have to see things in the large perspective. From the discussion, we learned that early marriage and FGM are both harmful practices. There are clearly factors that foster this practice in some communities, in some countries. There are effective interventions targeting parents that are implemented in some countries. This could be done through legislation, awareness campaign. There are also tools that can be used to implement, monitor, and scale up these interventions. With regard to the influence of media, the use of mass and social media is crucial today for adolescent sexual and reproductive health. But in the event it is not closely monitored, the influence could be negative. So the use of media need to be regulated in order to avoid this negative effect, because we have to encourage positive effect. There is a number of media programs targeting media actors, especially in the area of HIV infection, early marriage, legislation, young people empowerment, and so on. And these need to be encouraged so that media actors can be well equipped in order to implement some key interventions regarding adolescent sexual and reproductive health. This is what I would like to share with you as key highlight that came up from this fruitful discussion. Once again, I would like to thank everyone. I would like to thank panelists I would like to thank all colleagues, all colleagues. Over to you, Peter. Thank you very much.
And on behalf of WHO, more proud than ever to be part of WHO. My grateful thanks to APHRC, the wonderful APHRC team, for hosting this webinar, the first of 3 webinars, and to do what Anna Thorson said. Research studies and tools that are developed do not sit in shelves in rich countries. They are made available to people so that they can be used as needed in research and in programs all over the world, including in the global south. So very proud to be part of that exercise.
Okay, thank you, all panelists. Thank you, participants. So let's meet on Wednesday next week, 19th, at the same time, for a more in-depth explanation about the Global Early Adolescent Study and the toolkits. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you. Caroline,
Thank you.
there was a question about mental health, and we will address it in the next webinar. Mental health and adolescence, but mental health in COVID. The whole issue of toxic stress and mental health is so crucial to everything that's going on in adolescence. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Beatrice. And thank you quietly, Caroline, for adding to the chat.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.